Armand here with your forecast for December 2022. As I always say, this is a very general forecast. You probably want to subscribe and get the weekly forecast to really unpack things. As I don't always say with the monthly forecast, it is very likely that it is easier to follow along with December's forecast than it is other monthly forecasts. We have nice little chunks of time that we can look at to get a good general overview. And the beginning of the month, well, that's the easiest to describe as a very Neptunian time, a time of great uncertainty when we probably want to have answers and they are probably very elusive. And any answers that you get should be treated very provisionally. We have a lot of stuff going on as the month begins. We have Mercury square to stationing Neptune on the 1st. We have Neptune himself stationing on the 3rd, followed by a Venus square to Neptune, followed by Mercury square to Jupiter in Pisces, followed by Venus square to Jupiter. This is all the energy that comes in this is among the energies that come in the first week or 9 days of the month as we build up to the full moon in Gemini, which is on the 8th. So what does all this mean? Very Neptunian time when things are liable to be very nebulous, very uncertain. Great time for letting serendipity guide you. Great time for going to parties. Great time for meditating. Great time for getting lost in a fantasy, listening to music, making music, creating, whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't relate to the earthly Saturnian plane of practical decisions. Really poor time for that. Okay, so we don't want to think about this in terms of what can I practically do. It's about experience. The experiences can be great. And if the experiences aren't great, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I mean, if something terrible happens, that's awful. But if you're feeling terrible about things, don't take that too seriously, okay? Because our feelings are going to be energized. We're going to be a little porous by the Neptune station on the 3rd and all the aspects to Neptune. So there's going to be this kind of emotionality. And if it's not going in a good direction, don't take it too seriously. And if it is going in a good direction, don't take it too seriously. Now, Mercury gets into the mix. Now, Mercury's squaring Neptune on the 1st. Not a good time for making any kind of practical decisions. You can believe your own story. It's not like people are necessarily lying. As you probably know, lying actually takes a lot of work, and it doesn't go that well very often. But kind of fooling yourself into something and maybe fooling others along with you, well, that's a little easier to do. So that's a bit of the danger as we begin the month through the first few days. Now, after Neptune station, which is another very, very poor time for any sort of practical decision. So about fooling yourself, just buying a bill of goods when it comes to practical realities. Mercury goes on to square Jupiter. Now, here we have the opportunity to say too much. You can be very frank and open with Mercury and Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius and Jupiter out in Pisces. You certainly say a lot, very likely too much, more than you meant to say. So you want to kind of check that a little bit. So we have the little bit of deception of the Mercury-Neptune, and then we have that sort of overblown Mercury-Jupiter energy as we begin the month. So, kind of keep it to yourself a little bit. Take that energy inside. Really good thing to do with it. It's not what everybody's going to do, not at all. It's maybe what you should do. Take the energy, keep it inside. Now, Venus gets into the mix, and Venus squares station Neptune and then goes on to square Jupiter in Pisces. A lot to say about that. That will be something to unpack in the weekly forecast. But basically speaking, relationship stuff might look much better or much worse than it otherwise would. And, it's an exaggeration. Everything is seen through a fisheye mirror of the Neptune station in the first week of the month. So things look good, but don't take it too seriously. Things look bad, don't take it too seriously. One thing that the Venus, Jupiter and the Venus Neptune energy can do is, especially with Venus and Sagittarius, get you to spend a little too much for holiday shopping. Sure, and that Neptune station will really help. Oh, yeah, buy a luxury item. So what? We'll make up the money. When Venus jumps into or climbs into Capricorn on the 9th, you could have a really big case of buyer's remorse. And my Cancer moon is always wanting you to be careful with your finances. And I think Venus and Jupiter might be sort of making that a little bit tougher to do. So keep that in mind. Okay, we want to not overdo things. We don't want to overspend. We don't want to overinvest emotionally in the first week of the month. Then we get to the full moon on December 8th. That is in Gemini, tightly conjunct Mars. Mars, if you've been able to look up in the sky and see, really blazing away. Retrograde planets are close to the Earth. They're bright. Mars is really bright up in the sky and will be joined by the moon. Should be quite a show on the 7th, 8th, and 9th. Also, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you'll note that the moon is way overhead. And this full moon and January's full moon will be quite bright because they're quite overhead. You can go out and read by them on a clear night. It's really impressive sight. Astrologically speaking, the full moon conjunct retrograde Mars will spark up a lot of folks into all kinds of full moon lunacy and action and all kinds of heated words. Mars in Gemini retrograde. And so I would be a little cautious around this time. I would be cautious driving, among other things. But I would certainly take this as being a time when, again, it's not a bad energy. It could be a whole hell of a lot of fun, but folks could get a little bit overdone with things. Even as we start to pull away from the Neptunian energy a little bit, that kind of crazy vagueness returns in the form of the full moon conjunct retrograde Mars. It's a very emotional time. Things come out. So, again, you want to be a little cautious about that. At mid-month, the sun will have his turn squaring Neptune. That happens right around the 14th, the 13th to the 15th. Now, this is a waning square with the moon waning. It's not going to be the most active time. It's a square, so it's less likely to project onto other people, which is, pretty good thing, I would suppose. And again, you can make a little too much or a little too little out of a situation or out of yourself. This is about yourself. It's the sun squaring Neptune. So you could maybe be taking stock of yourself and what you've done over the course of the past year and sort of thinking about things. And again, it's not a very realistic energy. It's a great time. Forget the realism, forget the assessment. You'll have your annual review soon enough. This isn't the time to really be doing it. This is a good time to be meditating, to let the serendipity guide you. Once again, go for a long walk in the woods, whatever the thing is that you love to do, go to the beach or something like that. That's the energy for this time. Don't try to make it practical. Don't try to make it practical. Be creative. It's a great creative kind of energy, and it's not bad for socializing and things like that. But it's not good for anything that is practical here on this earthly plane, right? So we want to think about this in terms of water and fire and maybe air, but not earth, not earth. Okay. Then we have the solstice. The solstice happens on December 21st. You'll excuse my being northocentric, but it is the beginning of winter in the Northern Hemisphere. It is the darkest day of the year, and it is accompanied by some of the darkest nights of the year, or the longest night that is quite dark, because we're coming up to the new moon on December 23rd, the new moon in Capricorn. So this is a very introspective, quiet period that we're coming into. Really, I would say from the 18th through about the 23rd, 24th, 25th. Although it's going to be hard to keep it quiet as we get to the end of that period. But from the 19th onward, it's this more internalized kind of energy. It's a time that this is maybe the time for your annual review. This is your time to be thinking about what you did and didn't accomplish this year and what you're looking for next year. Of course, it's also the return of the light. Here in, I'm northocentric, I admit it. It's the return of the light. And if we don't have much light in the sky, we don't have the sun to shine during the day, so a little tiny bit above the horizon, and the moon checking out this year too. The moon will be new moon, so we don't get to see her at all. So we have dark nights. Time to create your own light. Literally, we create our own light with things like Christmas lights and trees and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa lights, candles, but we also can sort of foster the inner light at this time. This is a time for sort of going within and finding what light you find within. As I said, that only that sort of very spiritual explanation only goes so far. The new moon is also on the day of a Chiron station in Aries, by the way, and this could be a little ouchy in terms of the way you feel about yourself. So as your annual review, it's going to be sort of starkly honest if you do it right around the 23rd. This is not necessarily for those who are celebrating holidays with joy or reservations. That's a pun now that I think about it. For those who are celebrating the holidays, this internal energy is not necessarily the best. But as we get past the new moon, we have this mashup of energy on the 25th and 24th, all the way through the 28th, actually, where we have Mercury and Neptune and Pallas Athene and partnership asteroid Juno and Venus all making more or less harmonious aspects with each other. Very good time for communication and relationship. That Neptune conjunct Juno is going to put a sort of soft focus on relationships, but Pallas Athene is getting us to speak what we see as being the truth. It's a good energy for sort of righting the ship of relationship as the year comes to a close. Now, New Year's Eve, have some fun, but at the for some of us, it'll be at the very beginning of 2023, and others it'll be at the end of 2022, Venus conjuncts Pluto. So here's the planet of socializing and aesthetics and relationship conjunct Pluto, the god of the underworld, death and rebirth. It certainly suggests that, go deep, make deep decisions and commitments. And if you're feeling good about things, that's terrific. It's happening in the sign of Capricorn. So commitments would be a really good, word. I don't know if it's a good idea, but it'd be a good word. On the other hand, if things are not going well, this would be a time when it's very likely to come out, be at the surface. There are a lot of possibilities for this. I would also think it'd be kind of interesting, and when I say interesting, I mean somewhat potentially scary to see what this does to markets as January begins, and the economy in general, because Venus always has a lot to do with the economy as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Again, the planets always sort of set the table, and then we decide what we're going to serve and how we're going to eat it. So it's not necessarily good or bad for any of these things. It's just that it's very, very powerful. I wouldn't expect that New Year's Eve is going to feel that light with Venus conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. But, doesn't mean that you can't have a good time. Formal stuff, from the 9th onwards, from December 9th onwards, formal stuff is really favored with Venus in Capricorn. So all month long, or second half of the month long, it's the office parties and all sorts of, things that are a little bit more formal, structured, even though that we do have those periods of spontaneity around the 13th, right around mid-month is a spontaneity. But generally speaking, formality is favored. All right. I have to break down and unpack it in weekly segments. Of course, even those, how it affects your chart personally is a different issue. But that's the overview for the month. That gives you some hint about the way things are likely to flow in December. And we'll be back with the weekly forecasts, the January forecast, and of course, a quick look forward to all of 2023 in the coming weeks. See ya.